Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Big Business Blueprint live interviews, where we speak with one business leader and understand their personal and startup growth playbook, fundraising lessons, products and services they offer, and how they think about their market expansion, customer acquisition, customer retention, also attracting talent and building a tight knit workforce, and so on. I'm Bhuva Shakti, based in New York, and the founder of Wallet Max. We are a global community of startups, investors, and executives focused on increasing sustainable funding access, especially in climate tech, fintech, deep tech, and AI sectors. If you're a fintech, tech, AI, or sustainability focused startup from any industry, don't miss out the fundraising event from Wallet Max. We have startup pitch competitions and investor panel discussions. It's on September 18th as part of New York Climate Week. The tickets are now live, and you can see the Luma registration link scrolling below in the screen. Now, in my startup growth playbook interviews, the one we are in today, I typically invite a startup founder or co founder and invite them about their growth lessons. But more importantly, what differentiates them from the crowd? How do they prioritize impact along with profits and people? We deep dive into their personal, professional, and startup journeys and their mission to uplift. Today, we are speaking with Adam Trotman, the co founder and CEO of Aerium. Prior to co founding the company, Adam worked at McKinsey across their industrial, manufacturing, and quantum lab practices, deploying software at some of the world's largest companies. Personally, he also grew up around the industry through his dad's work, and one of his first jobs was machinery maintenance. Aerium is an AI workforce purpose built for industrial manufacturing and distribution. Let's get started. Thanks for joining us, Adam, today. Could you share a bit about your background and journey towards launching Aerium?
First, thank you for having me. Happy to be here. Um, on my background and getting to start Aerium, as you alluded to, kind of always grew up around the space. Was fortunate that my dad he worked in manufacturing and distribution businesses my entire life, and so was exposed to it through that at an early age. And then I also grew up in an industrial parkway. I'm originally from Toronto, so just north of Toronto, and so a lot of my friends and their families were also involved in the space, and so kind of felt like I was always around it. And um, it's funny you bring up the machine maintenance part. That actually started because I worked for an embroidery, clothing decorator, and I essentially broke one of the industrial embroidery machines. And the owner taught me how to do maintenance on the machines. And so for the rest of the summer, I my job transitioned from being an embroiderer to being a maintenance person for the machines that I would also run. And so that's where my exposure to that aspect of it came in. And then after I graduated university, I went to McKinsey, built software in the space in manufacturing, where I met my co-founder, and then kind of realized it was a great time to kind of take a risk and go and build a business. And we saw a lot of the things in the industry having great tailwinds, and so that's what kind of led to the high level of what we're doing now. But happy to dive deeper into what that actually looks like.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is a very unique background and also growing up in the industrial pathway, starting with machinery maintenance. Now, manufacturing is coming back at a big level, right? It's not that it was not there, but post pandemic, people have realized that it's really very essential that we need to focus quite a lot across different parts of the world. And your experience in manufacturing and machinery maintenance, I mean, how did that shape the company you're building today? I mean, what lessons have you taken from that to today's area?
Yeah, I think the best thing it gave me was just an understanding of how the industry works and the people within the industry. I think manufacturing teams and businesses sometimes get a bad rep about innovation or being cautious. But I one of the things that taught me is just like it's an industry built on trust and relationships matter a lot. And so in going to build Arium, the approach that we've taken is we understand that we're a vendor, but how can we be more than that? How can we be a partner to all of the companies that we work with? And I'll probably say it a number of times in the chat, but like, how can we help them solve their hardest problems? And that's existing. And I think the exposure to the world at a very early age kind of taught me the importance of doing that. Manufacturing is a business that has been burned uh, by software, call it, over the last 10 years. But you have seen these really unique scenarios of very successful companies who, when they like dedicate themselves to industrials a little bit broader, they have found a lot of success and they have delivered a lot of value for their customers and their clients. And we want to take a very similar approach to that.
Yeah, I mean, you rightly said, especially trust and relationships matter in the startup space as much as the manufacturing space. I mean, obviously, today in every part of the industry, it's really important because, especially with AI and a lot of technology transformation happening, people are more important than ever.
Yeah.
Relationships are more important than ever, right?
Yeah.
Um, so from machinery maintenance, you went to the other side of the industry, which is at McKinsey and Quantum Black, right? So what convinced you that when you founded Aerium, met your co-founder at McKinsey, it was worth leaving a great career to solve? I know it's worth it time to take risk and it's the right time, but why do you think the problem was so good that you had to leave everything and uh, put your full attention into this?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. McKinsey was a very great place, I think, for me to start my career. In the exposure and responsibility that you're given very early on into the job, if you ask for it, and obviously if you can meet the moment. And so it gave me a lot of those skills, and it also taught me how to handle, call it, the EQ side of these deployments and of these businesses. Obviously, AI has expedited the how quickly we can build technology and deploy technology, but there's a lot of things around that that directly affect the outcome of deployments. And then the last thing it gave me, and I met my co-founder there. And so that's the most, tangible benefit of being there. And when we looked at it and we were, looking to leave McKinsey, um, I will say we didn't leave with the exact specific idea of area. I think there's two things that we really looked at. One is the risk piece that I talked about. Given where we are in our lives and given the opportunity today with like deploying AI in the real world, that made a ton of sense. On the second thing, when we looked at manufacturing specifically, what we saw across the software that we built at McKinsey was a lot of it was, call it, just more dashboards and displaying data in nice, pretty formats. What
Mhm.
we realized, and it's going to sound obvious, is like dashboards don't do work, and
Yeah.
manufacturing is an industry that it just has constraints. And so, what's needed for them in this next evolution of software is like these autonomous systems that can essentially, one, fill the productivity gap and the labor shortage that is continuing to grow in this industry, and two, just take more work off their plate and allow them to achieve more. When we think about this world of pre-industrialization, it also means the amount of work added on their plates will continue to increase. And there's a very interesting and appealing opportunity to help them meet this productivity and skill gap for them to meet their moment, right? And so we noticed those two things, and we had exposure across a ton of different manufacturers and a ton of areas. So we didn't leave where this is the exact starting point, but we knew of like we had enough conviction of like this is the industry we wanted to work in. These are the people we wanted to work with. Let's go explore, experiment, and we just trusted ourselves to find our footing.
I mean, you rightly said that there's so much talk about software, but AI trying to automate many things, but also we need people, then there is shortage. Right? So we need the right people in the right roles, but also we don't want to overload them with manual labor that they don't want to continue to do this, right? So I mean, we are going to talk about AI a little bit later in the conversation, but for our audience today, I want to get a quick overview of what Arium is about. And in simple language, if there is someone who has no idea what manufacturing is, how would you explain Arium to them?
Yeah. So you describe this as an AI workforce for manufacturers. So essentially everything outside of the robotics layer of manufacturing, that's the workforce that we want to build. In our deployments, a lot of it starts with an operational data layer that's essentially mapping relationships between different entities within the organization, and then we tailor use cases on top of that to a business's specific context. So something we're doing a lot of is around the coding and proposal, call it handling and estimation, into like procurement and supplier sourcing. And so that's an entire workflow we're spending a lot of our time on. But we deploy, tailor-made solutions for manufacturers, for industrial manufacturers. And so in my mind, is chemical world and metal worlds that we touch. So like equipment manufacturers, and then use cases across supply chain operations and even getting into commercial activities.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. I mean, trying to build that AI workforce layer on top of the robotics layer is really interesting. And also, it's going to bring more productivity and efficiency both for the customers and also other people who are working in this industry, right? Now, you come from, obviously, we spoke about your manufacturing background, the McKinsey background. But let's say you're now a founder that had a different opinion about manufacturing and you've changed it completely now after becoming a founder. And what would that belief be about manufacturing that you had before that you've changed? Right.
Yeah. Weirdly enough, I don't think there's been a massive belief that's changed, but I think there's been a lot of beliefs that have been extremely reinforced. Um, Again, going back to the trust aspect of the industry, I think it's underplayed how big of a deal it is in the manufacturing world. And I think that's sometimes why, call it more traditional tech companies have struggled to sell into it because it's not a transactional industry. It's something where trust and relationships matter a lot. And when they enter, call it an agreement or an arrangement with someone, they're thinking about how can I partner with this person over the next, 3, 5 years, not how are we going to work with them over the next 3 months. And the other thing that's kind of really been reinforced is, and was one of our philosophies, early on is when you look at the companies who've been successful in selling to manufacturers, that they've committed to manufacturers. I.e., they don't see manufacturing as an adjacent industry that they serve; they see it as their industry. And so you think about companies like Honeywell, uh, Rockwell, all these, phenomenal manufacturing automation companies. And it was one of our early philosophies. And I think the more we explore and the more we work with every manufacturer, the more we realize the importance of committing to the industry and making them our priority rather than, an adjacent industry. And like, you do those things and they trust you, they start to ask you continue to do more work across the organization, which is obviously, what we want to see. And, we're happy to help them solve, again, their hardest problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Not considering manufacturing as your adjacent industry, but considering it your own, really brings you into solving the exact customer problem. And also, obviously, your clients build more trust with you. But you're on the B2B
Yeah.
side of things, which means, longer commercialization cycles, longer time to sell and get the trust and get into larger contracts. So enterprise sales can test every conversations.
Yeah.
So what has been your toughest leadership moment so far when it comes to enterprise sales?
Yeah, I think the thing I've learned the most, at least with selling, is um, two aspects. One is selling into these companies. Um, a lot of times they want to use AI, but they don't know where to get started. And so the importance of one being a thought leader for them and being a sounding board for them, as well as being a little bit more aggressive and, driving the pace of the sale, I think we've realized is incredibly important. And I think the second thing, which, I've had to learn a good about is sometimes you just need to ask for the close. And I think it's very easy, as a first time founder, when you're selling into these massive companies to almost not shy away from the moment, but be a little hesitant to ask for what you want. Obviously, you're giving them hopefully what they want as well, but asking for the close and asking for that next step of engagement and commitment is sometimes just the easiest way to push things along. And it sounds obvious, but I only learned that after, going through it and trying to do all these things and was frustrated early on sometimes about, you always want things to move quicker. But I think that simple switch, at least for me, has definitely shown and made things move quicker than it was previously, uh, which is obviously, great to see.
Yeah, I mean, I've had those moments as well. I'm pretty sure other founders have had. Sometimes we have assumptions, but then on the ground, the reality could be different. So it's better to ask what you want. And also, sometimes the clients may not know that you're waiting on something or you wanted to ask something. So it's better to have a transparent discussion. And
And I think the other, yeah, I completely agree. And I think the other thing that um, we knew, but we learned more and more and more, um, is like the idea of we're not trying to sell a product to our customer. And obviously, the way we deliver is through a product, but manufacturers are very outcome oriented. And so making the switch of, we're not selling you a platform, we're selling you a KPI or a P&L movement through the use of like our technology and our deployments. And so selling the outcome has become incredibly important. And I think especially as we move into this world of AI, outcomes, really is going to drive the needle in our opinion of like who are these successful companies and who are the companies that don't, reach the heights that they had the ambitions to do so. And I think that has also been a switch up, framing our conversations, framing our marketing material, framing our lunch and learns and workshops that we do with customers and prospective of customers around the outcomes that can be achieved, not around, we have this very shiny, cool tech that can do cool things. It's we're going to help you solve a problem. We are going to help you achieve your goal, and we are going to help you realize an outcome that's important to you personally, as well as your entire business.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of startups as well, especially on AI transformation. And earlier in the conversation, you mentioned about those dashboards, right? So, so cool that those dashboards have so many metrics, technical metrics that are of no use if it doesn't produce the relevant business outcome, right? So we should be more business outcome focused. Obviously, tailor everything towards that. And I think the world is getting to that. I believe manufacturing industry prioritizes outcome oriented conversation. So yeah, I mean, I have that conversation every day. Like that, people have so many metrics. What's the business outcome? It's very difficult to trace back to that, right? Uh, Now, moving on from enterprise sales, to like taking a look at your clients, they are more large industrial companies, right? So, as a first time founder, you have been working with them, though you have prior experience. So what's one lesson that most first time founders don't appreciate about large industrial companies until they experience it themselves?
Yeah. It's something that I think I've thought a lot about, over the past few months. And um, my opinion is I don't think they get credit for one, how innovative they actually are. Obviously, just by the structure of their business, they can't always move as quick as call it a a tech company, for example, that is of similar size, just because they have a lot more physical assets and the way they're used to making capital decisions are more large capex purchases. I'm going to buy a machine that's 2, 5, 10 million, a lot of money. And so sometimes the decision cycles are slower, as you alluded to with one of their previous questions. Um, but I don't think they get credit enough for, how innovative they actually are, whether it's like, if you think about a chemical manufacturer and like the R&D development and the money they pour into that and the attention they pour into that and that innovation spirit lives around the company. It's just like an ability for me as a founder to connect with it and kind of show them, you know, in a domain, call it software, that they're not as familiar with, how they can continue to be innovative and how, again, they can drive towards a specific business outcome and business goal. So I don't think they always get credit of, how innovative they are just because they're seen as, old school infrastructure, large buildings, slow assets, heavy assets, whatever it might be. But I think that spirit actually lives in a lot of these organizations. Um, yeah, and I think that's something that they should get some more credit for.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that fact with us because almost everyone that I know has that hearing about large industrial companies. So I think it's a wake up call where we appreciate their innovation, but also understandably, they have slower turnaround for obvious reasons because they are literally manufacturing material products. All of
Yes.
that.
Yeah, and as yeah, they get the reputation, being older or being archaic, and I don't think that's necessarily the right label to, associate with them. And I think they've just been phenomenal. And I think the other thing I really enjoy working in this industry is the besides that innovative spirit, the people in this industry are amazing. They are people that I feel that I can, hang out with outside of work. And I think one of the things that was important to me in starting our company, and my co-founder Mike as well, is we wanted to work with people that we enjoyed working with. And I think that's something that doesn't get spoken enough about, why we love manufacturing, why we love industrial companies. It's just the people in them are also phenomenal people. And I can't harp on that enough.
Yeah, I mean, building a startup, scaling is a tough job. And if you are doing it with people you like already, then it's going to not feel as tough, though it is tough,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And you're a co founder, but you're also the CEO. In many parts, a CEO has the ultimate accountability for many moving parts of the organization, right? So, how do you balance long term vision with the constant pressure to deliver short term milestones?
Yeah. I think that's naturally something, call it most founders, go back and forth in their minds about how simply I think about it is obviously a long-term vision. That's like our North Star. That's our ambition. That's what we want to drive towards. But when I think about these short-term milestones, I think they're a really good way to help you stay energized and fresh in achieving that long-term mission. And making sure that we celebrate these smaller moments is incredibly important. And the mindset that I bring to it is I used to be a junior hockey player in Canada. And so we'd have seasons that would extend, call it 60 plus games. And if you think about 60 games over the course of, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, that's a long time. And if you think about game 60 when you're at game 5, it seems so far away and it's so easy to, I think, become tired. You see how far is that to go. But it's if you think about, over these next 3 games, like here's what we want to get done and think about it in smaller chunks. That's, the operational mindset that we have, call it for, you know, 80% of the time. And then the 20% of the time, it's like the time to be really ambitious, get really energized by this big grand vision that almost seems, so impossible, that it's so far away. But it's like what makes us excited at the end of the day to do this and realizing this grand big vision that we have for our company and we have for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, keeping your North Star in mind, but also moving more operationally so you're making progress is a really great tactic. Now, if you could sit down with yourself, let's say on day one of area, what advice would you give that person?
Yeah, this probably my shortest answer I'll give. I think it's, figure out the one, two, three things that are really important and don't focus on anything else. I think it's that simple. And so for us, the two things that are important is like making sure our existing customers are happy, making sure we continue to provide value for them, and then two, finding new ways that we can provide more value to them as well as attract new customers. I think everything outside of that is essentially noise in us working towards our ambition.
Yeah, exactly. So, as long as startups, be it what industry, what kind of business model, are focused on solving customer problems and getting more new customers, preferably word of mouth organically,
Yeah.
is the best way to, validate your product and solution.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree.
Now, everyone talks about AI co-pilots, but you earlier described yours as a AI workforce, right? So, for people who have no idea what these are, what's the difference and why does that distinction matter to you at Area?
Yeah. How I would think about it simply is co-pilots are more reactive systems, and I think a workforce can be more of a proactive system. And so, with a co-pilots, as anyone has used any LLM, it's like input output. You feed it an input, it'll give you an output, and it only moves, when you ask it to move. Essentially, when we think about a workforce, we're essentially trying to build an autonomous system that will pick up on cues within an organization and execute the things that we know need to be done. And so I talked about that quoting workflow. Sitting as early in, an email ingestion point where we're sitting in someone's inbox, where we see a customer send a specification that we can automatically pull the details, important information out of it, respond back and flag missing information that the customer needs to provide. And then, build out that bill of materials, estimate the material costs, estimate the labor hours and engineering hours that are going to be required to fulfill that order. That is more of a proactive workforce and autonomous system that we're trying to implement. Um, and to do that, I think that's where that idea of the operational relationship data layer really matters across an organization, because for these autonomous systems to work, the one thing that they do need is context of the organization, right? And so if you think about building out a bill of materials, some of the context you need, although it might sound simple, is like the naming schema and the part numbers that a specific organization uses, the way they like to format the bill of materials, how they like to do their designs, how they like to submit quotes, what specific materials are going to be used in that bill of materials, what is the suppliers that they're most likely going to purchase those materials to put in the final end product. All of that context lives across an organization. And that's where we see the data layer becoming incredibly important to enable the workforce and the autonomous system and autonomous layer on top of it. Whereas a copilot, it only has access to the data we give it. Even with things like NCP servers or whatever it may be, sometimes the context, and most of the times the context, sorry, it just doesn't have that awareness. And that's where I think the real blocker is between the two. And especially, again, going back to manufacturing, context is incredibly unique to every business. And so that's where being more proactive has the added benefit than just a more simple, call it generic copilot.
Yeah, I mean, every client is going to love proactive, context-based
Yeah.
work because no one wants to be reactive. That's not proper risk management.
Yeah.
But this could be a controversial question. So now that you're building this AI workforce layer, where some of the tasks that humans are doing today could potentially be done by your AI workforce. So have you faced some kind of let's say discontent at the manufacturing clients that you have been discussing with about the jobs being, let's say repositioned, or what can people do who were doing this when they are not doing this anymore, right? This has been a conversation so far or not yet.
No, to your point, it's not entirely controversial. I think it's a very valid question that many people have. But I think when you look at the manufacturing industry and industrial industry in particular, they have been for the last couple of decades facing a labor challenge and a skill shortage that is required to meet the obligations of their business and now the growing obligations of their business. And so, a stat I can give you is essentially a quarter of the workforce in some of these industries is eligible for retirement in the next 5 years. And so you think about all of the population, all of the labor, and incredible employees that are going to leave the industry, while at the same time, you have less than 10% of younger generations even considering a career in these industries. And so those two things are just naturally at odds. And so the labor and skill shortage is continuing to increase. And so when we, talk with our customers, the problems we're hearing is they're struggling to hire. They are struggling to find good talent to do some of these jobs. Um, you know, Not everyone wants to move to some of these locations that these manufacturers might be across the continent, right? And so
Yeah.
our what we are building for them is actually helping them meet the labor and skill shortage that challenge that has been occurring in the industry for a long time. So the conversations we've had, even with the operators of our tool, with the executives of our customers and the executives of people and adjacent service firms that we talk to, that hasn't come up at all because they all understand the massive, mountain and challenge they have to overcome, you know, even if they were to stay at their current, growth levels or revenue. But now we're also seeing the added, benefit for them of like reindustrialization. So that means the gap is also accelerating within the industry. And that's why we think it's a very exciting opportunity. And that's why we find our customers, at least we hope so, excited to work with us and deploy some of our systems in there. But that's how I can speak about the industrial and manufacturing sector.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll be more open to also, right? With so much
Yeah.
focus on more manufacturing needs, not only in US but everywhere else as well.
Yeah.
If there is labor and skill shortage, you're only helping them to accelerate growth. But obviously, we have existing workforce that can still continue to work. And when we had the same challenge when the mainframes were there, and then a time came where everyone who was familiar with mainframes was about to retire in 5 years, and there was no one who had knowledge of any of that. And then we really had to come up with solutions. So, like that, every industry has a story.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, obviously we use the term workforce, but we are, teammates in augmenting its capabilities of um, you know, the human labor that exists in these industries, where a lot of the work that we can do is like taking away the, call it mundane data gathering, data analysis, data connection that will exist in some of these jobs, and moving, the responsibilities to a higher level, more strategic decision making. Because at the end of the day, depending on like the sensitivity of the data, depending on like the size of the contracts, that a manufacturer has with suppliers, you are always going to want a human decision making in the back half of that process. But the very beginning of the process, where it's getting data from my ERP, getting data from my manufacturing execution system, getting data from the job scheduling system or plant operator, that data gathering piece, and the execution that sits on top of it. These are the things that we are taking off as the human workforce, even newer talent and younger talent, steps into the more strategic decision making and essentially just augmenting what they can get done.
Yeah, I mean, rightly said. And you also mentioned that this industry generates enormous amounts of data,
Yeah.
right? And we spoke about dashboards and business outcomes earlier. But even with everything there, why do some companies still struggle to make operational decisions?
Yeah. Um, yeah, manufacturing a ton of data. Um, the challenge that we see in making the decisions, when gathering this data, or even people just making decisions on top of the data, is the connective tissue and the links between that data doesn't exist. You've seen lots of companies talk about this for the last few years, and a lot of my work at McKinsey when I was building software there was around connecting data and essentially creating a context layer across an organization. Is because without context, it's hard to make any decision. And if I can just give an example, if you think about a procurement manager and all the things that they need to consider when they make a purchasing decision. It's everything from the data that lives in your CRM and how your commercial and sales team is quoting, and the amount of work that they're quoting and amount of bids that they're winning, to what does my inventory look like? What does my job schedule look like? What does my maintenance schedule look like? What is the current environment of like freight and logistics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so there's a ton of context and a ton of links between data that needs to happen for someone to make these decisions. And in the industry, despite the enormous amount of data, and you can almost say it proliferates the size of the problem because there is so much data and because there is so much context in every decision. And so that's why I think these operational decisions aren't always snap of the finger, just because building that connective tissue is a difficult challenge. And it's why we've taken, call it a data centric approach to our deployments, where we build that relationship layer and then we enable these use cases, because context is king.
Yeah, I know. And you mentioned there are so many departments within a manufacturing unit, like procurement, supply chain, operations, or there could be more, right? With your solution, or even with just AI in general being in the industry today, where do you see the biggest opportunity in the manufacturing industry? Is it more in the procurement? Obviously, everyone can use it, but where would be the most ROI in terms of benefiting the customers and the businesses?
Yeah. Um, I don't think there's necessarily like a very clean cut, one size fit all answer. A lot of our work has started around procurement and supply chain. And that's in part because of, one, the amount of things that these companies need to purchase to actually run their operations. But then two, you also think about the volatility in global supply chains that has pretty much been around for the last 5 years. And manufacturing has been one of the, and distribution has been one of the sectors that has been hit the hardest. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of our work right now. And we expect that to continue to be the case. But I think if I take it higher a level, best opportunity is actually, where is a business struggling? Like, what is their hardest problem? And usually these hard problems span different functions. And so, if a manufacturer is having throughput issues or like job scheduling issues, that isn't only like an operations problem, but going back to my previous point, that's also, a procurement problem as well, because they need to purchase at the right time, make sure the materials are there at the right time, and make sure also materials don't get there too early, because inventory just becomes a working capital problem, which is then a finance problem, right? And so I think the really interesting problem actually sits at the intersection of all of these businesses. Just given that I think current climate, a lot of our work and where we have started as a company has been around the procurement supply chain aspect of most businesses.
I mean, you rightly said that there could be multiple moving parts, and we don't know what could be relevant for a manufacturing company. So, trying to take a case by case approach where AI fits and your solution fits is the right way to go about it, right? But also, we know industrial companies are naturally cautious because obviously they move a lot of inventory, lot of capital, like you mentioned. It's a delicate balance between putting too much money into inventory when, how, and we should not run out of inventory when there is a need, right? So, earlier in the conversation, you also mentioned about trust and relationships, which is a key component in your discussions, right? So, how do you earn enough trust for them to let AI influence their mission critical workflows? So, even though they have labor shortage, skill shortage, sometimes people need to see how things will turn out, and with something really critical for their organization, it might take a little bit time. So, how do you balance that?
Yeah. Um, I again, as I mentioned before, I don't know if I would call them entirely cautious, but they definitely are someone who will evaluate and go through a process more than a lot of companies. And I think again, back to it as part of they've just been burned by software before, and so that's naturally caused them to move a little slower. And because it's an older industry, and in the sense of how long it's been around, they've also seen a lot of like ups and downs of technological innovation, and so I think there's a lot of ingrained mindset of how do we, approach technological innovation that might not exist in other areas. And one thing I will say is there has been a resounding opinion that we're seeing of AI being one of these critical technological innovations that we need to take advantage of and we need to move quicker towards. Compared to how they were, for example, in building like the digital factory with like PLCs or like cloud software, getting your data there, immediately. There wasn't that big of a jump. Whereas here, I think they are moving a lot quicker than previous technological innovations. But to answer your question directly, going back to how we convince them essentially to trust them to affect critical workflows, I would say again three things. One, it's when we start working with a customer, we aren't touching everything right away. We are going to have a very defined use case that has a very defined like metric of how successful our early deployment is going to be, and we will track against that metric and that outcome. And so again, we're not selling a product; we're trying to sell outcomes, and you sell outcomes by tracking the outcome. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing, again, is like that idea of you need to build for them. You need to show that we are a part of the manufacturing industry. We're not just here to show up at one trade show and then never come again. We are going to be at the trade shows that you're going to be at. We are going to be in the spots that you're going to be at. And again, if you look at the companies that have been successful building in the manufacturing space, like Rockwell, Honeywell, Emerson, even Palantir, for example, has been very, very successful building for manufacturers in their commercial practice because they have built, again, specifically for manufacturers. And I think the third thing that sometimes just gets overlooked, the power of getting on a plane and going to shake someone's hand and look them in the eye is incredibly, incredibly important. And it's honestly very low hanging fruit. And I think that's something going back to our time at McKinsey, me and my co-founder, that we've learned. Seeing people in person matters a lot, especially in this industry. And if we want to affect these very mission critical workflows that are going to pay a be of large importance to call it the West and like North America and the States, Canada, and whoever it may be, you need to build that relationship so they trust you to touch mission critical work. And so getting on a plane, I can't harp enough and like being close to your customers and go out to see your customers. Uh, I can't, advocate and harp on that enough.
Yeah, I mean, I call it the lost art of business development or networking. I mean, you don't have to meet them in person all the time, but
Yeah.
at least a few times, the first time, it really matters where you establish trust and then continue to work on the relationship, right?
Yeah.
Now, you probably heard of early customer curiosity whenever a startup comes to life. There are those early customers who will adopt, but then over time, it may die down or it may slow down, or you may find out, okay, your product is for a totally different customer profile, right? So, What signals told you Aerium had real product market fit rather than early customer curiosity? I mean, how do you validate that in the manufacturing industry specifically?
Yeah, and as every company always is, we're always, working towards the evolution of what it actually needs to, have that to and solve the right problems for our customers. As we grow as a company, I think two things come to mind that we've seen that have been positive signals. One, this idea of manufacturers continuing to ask us to solve, the adjacent problem and our problems that exist for them. I think that's just a very good signal that we're clearly doing something right in our deployments. And then the second thing is just like tech feedback loops. Um, One thing that I'm proud of the work that we delivered is our customers have always seemed to be engaged and have
Mm.
really tight feedback loops and iteration loops with us. And obviously, the faster they do that, the faster we're also able to help them move. And they're only going to move fast and give feedback if they feel it is uh, a project or an effort within an organization that is worth their attention, their feedback, and their iteration involvement. And so I think those are the two big things. And again, it goes back to our earlier points. It's just like essentially solving problems for our customers. And if we do that well enough, I think everything else falls into place.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, if you solve the right problem, not necessarily all the problems, then
Yeah.
probably that's going to become a repeat journey with you. Uh, we also spoke earlier a little bit about productivity, efficiency, but also labor shortage and skill shortage, right?
Yeah.
Today, almost every startup is a AI startup, and many of them focus primarily on productivity, right?
Yeah.
They are more about efficiency metrics, productivity metrics. But then you emphasized business outcomes. I'm a big fan of business outcomes. So, how do you measure business outcomes that matter to manufacturing executives and investors? Because at some point, you'll need capital so that you can continue to scale and serve your customers, right?
Yeah. So on the topic of productivity, um, it's not that we don't make our customers more productive, but productivity needs to be in the pursuit of something. And if you are more productive as a workforce, you should see a real business P&L dollar impact towards this increased productivity. Sorry. It's not that people, let's say they can get the work done in 50% of the time and means they don't have to work the other 50% of the time. It's because we are moving to X speed. Should we push the business further and along? And I think once you do those things, the the customer's happy and obviously the employees are happy, and usually they also see progression within their organization. Um, Going back to like how we actually measure this aspect and how we drive towards it, I think the first thing, again, mention it, just alignment before we begin any deployment or work with anyone. Like, what is the objective that we're working towards? Because you can't retroactively measure something, because then you're just essentially will change the story to what suits you, and that might not always be aligned to the story that the manufacturer needs to have. It needs to tell essentially. And so it's one is like alignment on what is this, KPI objective P&L impact that we're going to work toward. And so you can measure it along the way. The second thing, and it's obviously difficult to do, is just this idea of, attribution. What, was because of thing one, what was because of thing two, what was because of thing three. Our approach to it is attribution isn't entirely always that important, but it's like if we are making substantial progress towards this objective from the day we started to like the current day, there is clearly some strong correlation that we are playing in working towards that outcome. And I think if you just show that correlation and you show essentially the slope of working towards that objective, and that question essentially answers itself. Sorry. And that's how we think about it. And um, no, I'll say this again, and there's a few things I'll always say is we want to be a partner towards our customers and less of a vendor. And partners, deliver business outcomes in our mind and help them solve the toughest problems that lead to business outcomes, P&L outcomes, dollar outcomes. And I think that's kind of the mindset we've taken. And maybe that's just like a McKinsey thing that's kind of been ingrained in me and my co-founder, because McKinsey is big. Um, Despite all the slack it might get in selling and like delivering on outcomes. I think we just, taken that mindset and applied it into our own business.
I mean, cannot stress enough about business outcomes. Obviously, productivity isn't given, but then what happened because of increased productivity for the business itself really matters, right? Now, there is so much talk about reindustrialization, not only in the US, but all of North America, Europe, almost every corner, right? Uh, where do you see the biggest opportunities for startups to create value? Obviously, one is your kind of a startup, but then what are some other opportunities that you think that would potentially create value for large industrial manufacturers?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of hard problems that are worth dedicating, call it the next 10, 20 years of your life solving. And you're seeing, a lot of adjacent companies to us, pretty much in every corner of industrial and manufacturing and going after solving them. Um, the big thing I'd say is, again, it's just trying to figure out a prickly hard problem that most people want to ignore because of how hard it is, and like being willing to solve that, I think is the correct approach for any startup. And if you look at manufacturers, businesses, and the mindset they take towards their customers, you'll see a lot of really successful manufacturers who essentially have taken the mindset um, to their customers of what are your problems? Like, what is the thing no one else will do for you? And like, how can we help you solve that? I was literally speaking with a design to fabricate manufacturing business, and their north star and their vision has always been working with their customers to solve problems that look everyone else is too afraid to touch. I'm like, that's how you're going to create real value, and you're working with the people, and they trust you. They'll give you hard problems because they need them solved. And I think like the second aspect of it all, and something that we definitely focus on is to reindustrialize. You essentially need to move, call it the 95, 99% of manufacturers who have existed pre-2010s, pre-2000s into the present and into the future, right? That is how we, in our opinion, that is one of the biggest levers that we can pull to reindustrialize. And so it's that question of, you look at a manufacturer that was started in the 1950s is probably worth a couple $1 billion. How can you move them, or a couple $100 million? Like, how can you move them to the next stage of their growth? That I think is a very interesting question to solve. How you execute and how you actually do that. Everyone has varying opinions, but I think that is like a very big part to be industrializing, you can say. And that's something we are incredibly excited about. Uh, and our customers are incredibly excited about as well.
Yeah, I mean, take them to the next level, whatever that next level is that fits wherever they are today, right? That's the best value you can create for a manufacturer or even any kind of a client or industry as we speak today. And I know we can't predict the future, but let's say I ask you to look ahead, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, what will the best manufacturers be doing with AI that seems unrealistic today? So many things we thought were unrealistic few years back are becoming real today, right? So what's something like that?
Yeah. Obviously, no one can predict the future. And we obviously um, we talk about the North Star long term vision. We obviously have our idea of what that may be. I would say, a very interesting trend has um, called it become trendy in the last couple of weeks is this idea of um, manufacturers or businesses like manufacturers owning their intelligence, essentially. And it's something that we've been focused on since we started, where when we deploy into an organization, we have always used like a combination of SLM, so small language models, custom trained machine learning models, even, open source when necessary and where we think it's important or where our customer think it's important. But this idea of, one, if companies see data as one of their most valuable assets, um, and one, two, they see data as being sensitive as well as some sort of competitive edge moat in, their area of execution. It is not entirely unreasonable to imagine them wanting models trained on their specific context. And so I think this idea where like they're owning their intelligence and they have models built specifically for them, or you know, whatever it might be, I think that trend you'll start to see a lot within the industry. And it's obviously something that we're making a strategic bet on is when we do these deployments, we are going to train on their context because some tasks are sensitive, require low latency, and you obviously just want to um, keep that edge within your company. And so the idea of in cloud deployments, on-prem deployments, hybrid distributed versions of that. I think that'll be an interesting trend play out, and that's something we're leaning into. I know there's a few other, um, you know, very later stage, growth stage public companies doing it. There's other, AI companies doing it in their own pockets. And I think that will be something more and more that you'll see where the basic premise is data is intelligence. You want to keep your intelligence internal.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more. And especially ownership of your data, your intelligence. It's not only in manufacturing industry. I think
Yeah.
it's becoming very important in every aspect of every even individual person's life and the organization's journey. Um, so yeah, happy to end on that note. But we're also kind of coming up time. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience? How can people get in touch with you? What's next for Arium in the next, let's say, 3 months?
Yeah. Well, if anyone's interested in getting in touch, email Adam at ariumhq.com. Always happy to connect with people. Um, working industry in manufacturing and industrials, looking to get into it, and also just happy to always share and go back and forth on opinions. What the next call it rest of the year looks like for us. I think it's just about continuing and always delivering for the customers that we have, and really pushing deep within these organizations and making sure we continue to provide value for them. And again, if we continue to do that, I think everything else will take care of itself. And excited to help these companies grow into the next phase of themselves. And just fortunate that we feel that we can be a part of the ride.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Anima. Good luck with everything, and thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us. And if you're a fintech, tech, AI, or sustainability focused startup, let's say from any industry, turns this out a crazy event from Wallet Max. We have startup pitch competitions and investor panel discussions. It's on September 18th as part of New York Climate Week. The tickets are now live, and you can see the Bhuva registration link scrolling below the screen. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks again, Adam, for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Take care.
Bye.